Rolly's ears suddenly pricked forward. The dog's body went rigid, muscles tensing beneath his fur. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the kind that meant danger, not play. Jordan set down his mug without a sound. His hand moved automatically to the knife at his belt. Years of training had made such movements instinctive. The dog bolted from the porch, racing toward the canyon with powerful strides. Jordan followed without hesitation, his boots pounding against the hard-packed dirt. His heart rate increased, but his breathing stayed controlled. Whatever this was, he would handle it. He always did. The sound reached him as he ran, a thin, piercing scream that cut through the morning air. It was not the shriek of an animal caught by a predator. This was different, higher, more desperate, the cry of something intelligent, something that knew it was dying. The isolated cabin sat on the edge of a desert plateau, surrounded by red rocks that glowed like embers in the morning sun. Jordan had been standing on the porch just moments before, a steaming mug of coffee in his weathered hands. The aroma had reminded him of Earth, the planet he had left 7 years ago. At 40, his face was a map of hard-won experience, lines etched deep around his eyes from years of squinting at hostile suns across a dozen worlds. His broad shoulders and scarred forearms told the story of a man who had survived what others had not, who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side forever changed. Beside him, Rolly had been stretching lazily before the alarm. The German shepherd's black and tan coat shimmered in the alien sunlight. Healthy and well-maintained, despite the harsh conditions of this world. The dog had been Jordan's only companion since he had left the Galactic Federation Marines after 15 years of brutal service. They had found this place together, far from the conflicts that still raged in distant star systems, far from the screams of dying soldiers and the thunder of orbital bombardments. Here the silence had been profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyon and the occasional cry of a hummingbird circling overhead. Jordan had learned to savor these quiet moments. He had learned to grow coffee beans in a small greenhouse behind the cabin, using hydroponics and sheer stubbornness to coax something familiar from this alien soil. It was one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. The rest of his life had been stripped down to essentials, reduced to the basics of survival. A rifle by the door, cleaned and oiled weekly, an axe for splitting the twisted wood that grew in sheltered valleys, a bow for hunting the scarce game that wandered through these badlands, creatures with 6 legs and scales instead of fur, but meat nonetheless. Now all that peace was shattered as Jordan pushed himself harder, his legs burning as he navigated the rocky terrain. Rolly had already disappeared over a ridge ahead, following whatever scent or sound had triggered his instincts. Jordan vaulted a fallen boulder with practiced ease, his body remembering the countless obstacle courses he had run during his military training. He skidded down a slope of loose gravel, maintaining his balance through sheer force of will, and the canyon opened before him with sudden dramatic clarity. The walls were carved smooth by ancient floods, striped with layers of sediment that told the story of this world's violent geological past. Mineral deposits glittered in the morning light, creating patterns that almost looked intentional, almost looked like writing in some unknown language. The canyon floor was littered with rocks of every size, from pebbles to house-sized boulders, and between them grew patches of the hardy purple vegetation that managed to survive in this harsh environment. Jordan found Rolly at the edge of what the few local traders he had encountered called a swallowing pit. He had seen one before years ago during his initial exploration of the area and had marked its location carefully on his mental map of dangers to avoid. The sand looked solid from a distance, firm and inviting, but it had the consistency of liquid glass beneath that deceptive surface. It pulled down anything that touched it with relentless patience, offering no grip, no purchase, no hope of escape for the unwary. In the center of the pit, perhaps 25 feet from where Jordan stood, a small figure clung to a rotting rope that was anchored to a rock on the far side. The rope was fraying badly, individual fibers popping loose with tiny sounds that Jordan's trained ears could hear even from this distance. Each small snap was a countdown to disaster, a timer ticking toward tragedy. The figure was a child, and she was unlike any human child Jordan had ever seen. Her skin was the bright blue of a summer sky on Earth, the vivid azure of childhood not yet darkened by the deeper cobalt tones that would come with adulthood among her people. She could not have been more than 9 years old, small and delicate in a way that made Jordan's protective instincts surge to the surface. Her long silver hair was matted with the glittering sand, transforming what should have been beautiful into something tragic. Her orange shirt, hand-woven from what looked like plant fibers, hung heavy with the weight of the sand that clung to it. Her large green eyes, the color of new leaves in springtime, met Jordan's with an expression of pure terror mixed with fading hope. She was sinking with terrible slowness. The sand crept up her chest with each passing second, each labored breath she took seeming to pull her down fractionally further. The rope groaned under the strain, the sound like the last wheeze of something dying. Jordan assessed the situation in the space between heartbeats, his military training taking over and suppressing any emotional response that might cloud his judgment. The pit was roughly 30 feet across at its widest point. The child was in the center, the worst possible position. The rope would not hold much longer, perhaps another minute if she was lucky, perhaps only seconds if fortune turned against her. He had no time to go back for equipment, no time to call for help, even if there was anyone within 100 miles to call. This was on him, and him alone. Without conscious thought, he stripped off his jacket and tied it around his waist to keep it from interfering with his movements. From his belt, he uncoiled a length of climbing rope he always carried, a habit ingrained from his military days when preparedness had meant the difference between life and death more times than he could count. Be prepared. Stay alert. Stay alive. These were the mantras that had kept him breathing through 15 years of war. He looped the rope around a solid boulder, testing it with his full weight before committing to it. The rock held firm, embedded deep in the canyon floor. He tied the other end around his chest in a rescue harness, using knots he could tie in his sleep. Knots that had saved his life and the lives of his squad mates on planets whose names he tried hard to forget. Jordan stepped onto the edge of the pit, feeling the sand shift beneath his boot like something alive and hungry. He kept moving forward, refusing to give it time to grip him, distributing his weight as evenly as possible across the largest surface area he could manage. He dropped to his stomach, spreading his arms wide, making himself into a human plank. The sand accepted him like cold water, flowing around his body with unnatural smoothness, but his forward momentum kept him from sinking immediately. He began to crawl with deliberate precision. Each movement was calculated down to the inch, informed by years of training in hostile environments. He kept his breathing steady and controlled, his muscles as relaxed as he could manage despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Panic killed people in situations like this, transformed survivable danger into certain death. Calm kept them alive, gave them the clarity to think and the steadiness to act. The child watched him approach, her lips trembling with the effort of holding back sobs. She was trying so hard to be brave, trying to show strength in the face of overwhelming fear. And Jordan's heart ached for her even as his mind stayed focused on the mechanics of rescue. He could see her fingers white-knuckled on the fraying rope, could see the way her whole body shook with exhaustion and terror. "Hold on," he called to her in the common trade language, his voice firm and commanding, despite the strain he was under. It was the voice he had used to give orders to Marines under fire, the voice that projected confidence and authority even when he felt neither. "I am coming to get you. Do not let go of that rope until I tell you to. Do you understand me?" She nodded, a tiny jerking motion of her head that spoke of determination fighting against despair. Her green eyes locked onto his, and he saw something in them that reminded him of soldiers he had known, people who had stared death in the face and refused to accept it. Jordan was halfway to her, his progress agonizingly slow but steady, when disaster struck. The rope snapped with a sound like a gunshot, the frayed fibers finally giving up their fight against physics and tension. The child screamed, a sound of pure terror that would haunt Jordan's dreams for weeks to come, and plunged deeper into the sand. It was up to her shoulders now, creeping toward her neck with horrifying speed. Jordan abandoned caution and lunged forward, ignoring the sand that immediately tried to drag him down. His hand shot out with the speed of a striking snake and grabbed her wrist. His fingers locked around her arm with unbreakable force, and he felt her pulse racing beneath her blue skin like a frightened bird's heartbeat. "Let go of the rope," he barked, his voice sharp and clear, cutting through her panic like a blade. Grab my arm with both hands. Do it now. That is an order. Something in his tone reached her through the fear. She obeyed instantly, releasing the useless rope and wrapping both her small hands around his forearm with surprising strength. Jordan felt the sand pulling at him harder now, trying to claim them both, trying to add them to whatever collection of bones and debris lay at the bottom of this pit. He began to work his way backward, using his free arm and his legs to push against the resistance. It was like trying to swim through cold syrup, every movement requiring enormous effort. His muscles screamed in protest, burning with the strain of fighting against the sand's inexorable pull. Sweat poured down his face despite the morning chill, mixing with the grit that covered his skin and stinging his eyes. But he had carried wounded Marines through worse conditions than this. He had dragged men twice this child's weight out of burning buildings while wearing full combat armor. He had crossed killing fields under enemy fire with injured comrades on his back. He would not fail now. Failure was not an option. It never had been. Inch by brutal inch, they moved toward solid ground. The child had wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps that he could feel against his skin. He could feel her trembling, could hear her trying not to cry, trying to maintain the brave front she had shown him. You are doing well, he told her, keeping his voice steady even though his lungs were burning and his arms felt like they were being torn from their sockets. You are very brave. Just hold on a little longer. We are almost there. Rolly barked encouragement from the edge of the pit, the sound giving Jordan something to focus on besides the pain and exhaustion. His vision was starting to narrow to a tunnel, his peripheral awareness fading as his body diverted all available resources to the muscles doing the work. Move, breathe, move, breathe. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. His hand touched rock, real and solid and wonderful. He pulled them both onto it and kept crawling, refusing to stop until they were well clear of the pit's edge, until there was no chance of the sand reaching out to claim them after all. Only then did he allow himself to collapse onto his back, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through his ribs. The child lay on top of him, still clinging with desperate strength, her whole body shaking with silent sobs now that the immediate danger had passed. Jordan wrapped his arms around her and held her while she cried, giving her the comfort she needed, giving her time to process what had just happened. Rolly pushed his nose against them both, whining softly, licking the sand from their faces with his rough tongue in a gesture of canine affection that somehow made the moment more bearable. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they lay there recovering. Jordan could feel the heat starting to build, could feel his sweat-soaked clothes beginning to dry in the arid air. His arms would be bruised tomorrow, he knew, dark purple marks where the sand had tried to hold him. His chest would be sore from the harness, and his legs would ache from the effort. But he was alive, and the child was alive, and that was all that mattered. After several long minutes, the child's sobs subsided into occasional hiccups and sniffles. She pulled back slightly and looked at Jordan with those remarkable green eyes, still wet with tears, but no longer drowning in terror. Her expression had transformed into something else now, something that looked like wonder mixed with profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered in accented common, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the canyon. "You saved my life. I thought I was going to die. I thought the sand was going to swallow me, and no one would ever know what happened to me." Jordan sat up carefully, still holding her to make sure she was steady, and began brushing sand from both their hair and clothes. His hands were gentle despite their size and the calluses that covered his palms. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now that the crisis had passed. "Emina," she said, pronouncing each syllable with care. "I am Emina, daughter of Gabrali, chief of the Starlight clan." The name meant nothing to Jordan. He knew very little about the Kasu clans that inhabited this region of the planet. They kept to themselves, maintaining their isolation with careful deliberation, and he had preferred it that way. He had come here seeking solitude, seeking escape from the entanglements of civilization and politics, and all the complications that came with being part of a society. "What were you doing out here alone, Emina?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "This is not a safe place for a child. This is not a safe place for anyone. Her gaze dropped to the ground and he saw shame color her expression. I wanted to see the crystal flowers, she admitted, her voice small and guilty. They bloom in the canyon beyond the pit after the rain. My mother told me not to come here, told me the swallowing pit was dangerous, but I thought I could be careful. I thought I could cross on the rope that the hunters left behind. I thought I was smart enough to do it safely. Jordan sighed, recognizing in her words every young soldier who had ever thought themselves invincible, every recruit who had believed the rules did not apply to them. Children were the same everywhere in the galaxy, he thought with a mixture of exasperation and affection. Curious and reckless, driven by desires they could not yet properly weigh against risks, not yet wise enough to fear the right things or respect the dangers that could kill them. Your mother was right, he said, but his tone was not harsh. You should have listened to her. Parents make rules to protect their children, not to punish them. Do you understand that now? Emina nodded miserably, tears threatening to spill over again. I know. I am so sorry. She is going to be so angry with me when she finds out. She is going to be disappointed. Jordan helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly with exhaustion. She is going to be relieved that you are alive, he corrected gently. That is what parents care about most. Everything else is secondary to that. He looked her over more carefully now, checking for injuries beyond the obvious exhaustion and fright. Her arms and legs were scraped from struggling against the sand, but nothing appeared broken. The cuts would heal cleanly if kept clean. Come on, he said. I will take you home. Where is your clan's settlement? Emina pointed toward the valley below, her hand shaking slightly as she raised it. But then her eyes caught movement in the distance, and her face went suddenly pale beneath the blue of her skin. A group of figures was moving through the scrubland, heading away from the canyon in a pattern that suggested a search party returning home after an unsuccessful hunt. I must go, she said quickly, urgency replacing the exhaustion in her voice. They cannot find me here like this. My mother will be so angry if she knows I disobeyed her. She will never let me out of the settlement again. Before Jordan could respond, before he could offer to explain what had happened or suggest that honesty might be the better path, she darted into the thick brush that lined the canyon rim. She moved with the speed and agility of youth despite her ordeal, her small form disappearing into the vegetation like water soaking into sand. He called after her, but she was already gone, leaving nothing but disturbed leaves and small footprints in the dust. Rolly started to follow, his hunting instincts triggered by her flight, but Jordan whistled him back sharply. The dog returned reluctantly, looking up at his master with an expression that seemed almost reproachful. Jordan stood there for a long moment, looking at the tracks the child had left in the dust, at the disturbed sand near the pit that told the story of their struggle. Then he turned and made his way back to his cabin, Rolly trotting at his heels with his tongue hanging out. The sun was much higher now, approaching its zenith, beating down with the relentless heat that characterized this world's summer season. Jordan's clothes were still damp with sweat and the strange sand from the pit, which seemed to cling to fabric with unnatural persistence. He would need to clean up thoroughly, to check his rope for damage, to put his cabin back in order and return to the routine that had sustained him for 7 years. But as he walked, placing each foot with the careful economy of motion that came from years of long marches, he could not shake the feeling that his quiet life had just ended. Saving the child had set something in motion, had created ripples that would spread outward in ways he could not yet predict. He could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, like the electric tension in the air before lightning struck. When he reached his cabin, he spent the rest of the day in careful maintenance of his equipment. He cleaned the sand from his rope and inspected every inch of it for weak spots or abrasion. He oiled the leather of his boots where the sand had dried it out. He washed his clothes and himself, scrubbing away the grit that had worked its way into every crease and fold of skin. The water from his well was cold and clear, drawn from an underground river that ran deep beneath the plateau, and it felt glorious against his overheated skin. That night, he found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling of his cabin and thought about green eyes wide with terror and a small voice saying thank you. He thought about the way the child had tried so hard to be brave, about the strength in her grip when she had held on to him. He thought about his own childhood on Earth, about the times he had disobeyed his parents and gotten into trouble, about the rescue that had shaped him into who he was today. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, but his sleep was restless and filled with dreams of sand and screams and a rope breaking in slow motion. 3 days passed in a state of heightened alertness. Jordan fell back into his routine, but he remained watchful in ways he had not been before. He cleaned his rifle more carefully than usual, breaking it down to its component parts and reassembling it until the action was perfectly smooth. He sharpened his knives until they could split hairs, testing them on pieces of wood until he was satisfied with their edges. He checked the perimeter around his cabin each morning and evening, looking for tracks or signs of approach, making sure he would not be surprised by whatever was coming. On the morning of the third day, Rowley gave the alert again. Jordan was on the porch, breaking down his rifle for what must have been the 10th time in 3 days, when the dog suddenly stood at attention. His ears were forward, his tail stiff and high, his whole body quivering with focus. Jordan looked up and scanned the valley below, his eyes automatically picking out movement against the static background of rocks and vegetation. What he saw made him pause, made his breath catch in his throat for just a moment before his training reasserted control. A procession was approaching from the direction Emina had pointed 3 days before, moving with the kind of disciplined coordination that spoke of military training or long cultural tradition. Even from a distance, Jordan could see the glint of metal armor catching the sunlight, could see the coordinated stride of trained warriors moving in formation. They were not trying to hide their approach, were not attempting any kind of stealth or subterfuge. This was an official visit, announced by their very visibility. They were Kasu, dozens of them, and they were coming directly toward his cabin with obvious purpose. Jordan went inside and retrieved his tactical armor from the trunk where he kept it. The armor was old, its surface battered from years of use and marked with scars from weapons both primitive and advanced. The ceramic plates had been repaired multiple times, the straps replaced, the padding patched, but it was still functional, still capable of stopping most small arms fire and deflecting blade strikes. He had maintained it with the same care he gave his weapons, understanding that equipment neglected was a life thrown away. He strapped on the armor piece by piece, feeling its familiar weight settle onto his shoulders like an old friend returning. He added his combat knife in its sheath on his thigh, positioned for a quick draw. He holstered a sidearm, an old chemical propellant pistol that still worked perfectly despite being older than some of the soldiers he had served with. He left the rifle inside, leaning it against the wall near the door where he could reach it quickly if needed. If the Kasu wanted to kill him, the rifle would not make much difference against that many warriors. If they wanted to talk, showing up bristling with long arms would be an unnecessary insult. He stepped out onto the porch and waited, standing at parade rest with his hands clasped behind his back. Rowley stood beside him, calm now that Jordan was prepared and in position. The dog understood that his master was ready for whatever came next, and that understanding brought peace. The procession climbed the path to his cabin with steady determination, their formation never wavering despite the difficult terrain. As they drew closer, Jordan could see them more clearly, could make out individual faces and details of equipment. They were mostly women, which made perfect sense for the Kasu. Jordan had learned from the few traders he had encountered that Kasu society was strongly matriarchal, with women serving as warriors, leaders, hunters, and decision-makers. The men tended to stay in the settlements, managing domestic affairs, raising children, tending crops and herds. It was a division of labor that had served them well for countless generations. The warriors wore fitted armor made from some kind of hardened leather or chitin, organic material that had been treated and shaped to provide protection. The armor was reinforced at vital points with metal plates, probably iron or steel given the color and the way they caught the light. They carried an array of weapons that spoke of a warrior culture refined over centuries. Spears with leaf-shaped blades, bows made from laminated wood and horn, swords that looked like they could take a head off with a single strike, axes both single and double-bladed. Their blue skin ranged from pale sky to deep cobalt, creating a spectrum of color that was striking in its variety. Their hair varied too, from silver like Amina's to deep purple that was almost black, worn in a variety of styles from practical braids to elaborate constructions held in place with metal pins. At the front of the group walked a woman who could only be the leader, and she was magnificent in a way that made Jordan's breath catch slightly in his chest. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, built with the kind of lean muscle that came from a lifetime of physical activity and combat training. She had the bearing of someone born to command, someone who had never doubted her right to lead and had never been given reason to question that confidence. Her armor was more ornate than that of her warriors, decorated with intricate patterns that might have been purely decorative or might have told stories in a language Jordan did not understand. Her hair was a striking silver that shimmered like metal in the sunlight, bound back from her face with metal beads that clinked softly as she moved, creating a subtle music with each step. Her eyes were the same vivid green as Amina's, bright and intelligent and currently fixed on Jordan, with an intensity that he could feel like physical pressure. Beside her walked Amina herself, clean now and dressed in a white tunic embroidered with blue thread in patterns that resembled flowering vines. The child looked nervous but also excited, her eyes darting between her mother and Jordan as if trying to gauge how this meeting would unfold. The procession stopped exactly 10 feet from Jordan's porch, a distance that was close enough to speak comfortably, but far enough to avoid appearing threatening. The warriors arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, not quite a battle formation, but ready to become one at a moment's notice. Jordan appreciated the professionalism even as he remained alert to the potential danger. The lead woman stepped forward and inclined her head in a gesture of respect, a slight bow that acknowledged Jordan as someone worthy of recognition without suggesting any kind of subservience. Jordan returned the gesture with precise military formality, keeping his movements controlled and respectful. "I am Gabrali, chief of the Starlight clan," the woman said in perfect common, her accent slight but adding an exotic quality to the trade language. Her voice was rich and strong, carrying easily across the distance between them, a voice accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. "You saved my daughter from the swallowing pit 3 days ago. I have come to thank you personally and to honor the debt my family owes you. A life debt is not something my people take lightly." Jordan kept his expression neutral, his face showing polite attention, but no particular emotion. "I did what anyone would do," he said, his own voice calm and measured. "A child was in danger. I helped her. There is no debt." Gubberly's lips curved in a slight smile that suggested she had expected this response and found it both predictable and admirable. "You are modest, that is good, but not everyone would have risked their life for a stranger, especially not a stranger of a different species. You could have walked away. You could have convinced yourself that it was not your problem, that my daughter's fate was her own responsibility. You did not do that. That speaks to your character in ways that words cannot fully express." She gestured to Amina, who stepped forward holding a wooden box in both hands. The child approached the porch steps with careful deliberation, each movement precise and formal in a way that suggested she had been coached on proper protocol. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch and offered the box to Jordan with both hands extended, her head bowed in a gesture of deep respect. Jordan took the box carefully, noting its weight and the quality of its construction. It was made from dark wood polished to a high sheen, the grain creating patterns that seemed to flow like water. The corners were reinforced with metal fittings that showed the marks of a skilled craftsman. He opened it with deliberate care. Inside, resting on a bed of soft cloth that might have been silk or something similar, was a bracelet of stunning beauty. It was crafted from a silvery metal that seemed to shift colors as he looked at it, going from blue to purple to green, in a way that suggested it was reacting to the light or perhaps to something else. Set into the metal were 3 stones that pulsed with an inner light, glowing and dimming in a rhythm that reminded Jordan of a heartbeat made visible, of life itself rendered into crystalline form. "Star metal and heart gems," Gabrali explained, her voice taking on a note of reverence that suggested these materials were not merely valuable, but sacred. "The metal comes from the mountains where the sky fell long ago, where pieces of the heavens crashed into our world and buried themselves in the stone. We mine it carefully, taking only what we need, always thanking the earth for its gift. The gems grow deep in the caves beneath our settlement, forming over centuries in chambers where water and minerals combine in ways we do not fully understand. Together, they are a symbol of our clan's strength and unity, a physical manifestation of the bonds that hold us together." She paused, letting Jordan examine the bracelet more closely. He could see that the craftsmanship was extraordinary, every detail perfect, every joint seamless. "This bracelet marks you as a friend of the Starlight Clan," Gabrali continued, her tone becoming more formal, more ceremonial. "You may travel our lands freely without fear of challenge or harm. You may hunt in our territories and fish in our waters. You may call upon our aid if you have need, and we will answer. And you will always find welcome at our fires, now and for all the years of your life. This is not a small thing we offer you. This is a bond that has been given to only a handful of outsiders in all the generations since our clan was founded." Jordan lifted the bracelet from the box with careful reverence, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It was warm to the touch, warmer than the surrounding air. And as he held it, it seemed to adjust to the temperature of his skin, becoming more comfortable, more natural. He slipped it onto his wrist, half expecting it not to fit, but it settled into place as if it had been made specifically for him. The metal felt alive somehow, pulsing gently against his skin in time with his heartbeat. "I am honored," he said, and meant it with complete sincerity. "Thank you. I will wear it with pride and respect what it represents." Gabrali's smile widened, transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "There is more," she said, her voice shifting from formal to something more personal, more intimate. "Tonight, we celebrate the rising of the twin moons. It is a night that comes only once each season, when both moons reach their full phase at the same time and rise together from behind the eastern mountains. It is a night of feasting and dancing, a time to strengthen the bonds between clan members, to remember our ancestors and celebrate our living family. I would be honored if you would join us as our guest, as someone who has earned the right to be part of our celebration." Jordan hesitated, feeling the weight of the invitation pressing down on him. He had not attended a social gathering in 7 years, had deliberately avoided any situation that required him to interact with groups of people. He had left that life behind, along with the uniforms and the ranks and the orders and the endless cycle of violence and camaraderie that came with military service. But refusing this invitation would be an insult, would damage the relationship Gabrali was trying to build, and he had no desire to make enemies of these people who had shown him nothing but respect and generosity. "I will come," he said, making the decision before he could second-guess himself. "It would be my honor to attend." Gabrali's smile transformed again, becoming something that was not purely professional or diplomatic. There was personal interest in her eyes now, a warmth that went beyond gratitude or political calculation. She looked at him the way a woman looked at a man she found attractive, and Jordan felt something stir in his chest that he had thought long dead. "Come at sunset," she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate even though they were surrounded by witnesses. "Wear your warrior's garb, as you are now. My people respect strength above all else, and they should see you as I see you, as a warrior worthy of admiration and honor." There was absolutely no mistaking the meaning in her words now, no way to interpret them as anything other than personal interest. Jordan felt his pulse quicken slightly, felt a stirring of attraction and possibility that he had not experienced in longer than he cared to remember. "I will," he said, holding her gaze for a moment that stretched just slightly too long to be merely polite. Gabrali held his eyes for that moment, letting the connection build between them, then turned to her warriors with visible reluctance. "We return home," she announced, her voice carrying the ring of command. "The debt is acknowledged, the friendship established. Let the word spread throughout all the territories we control. This human, this Jordan, is under the protection of the Starlight Clan. Any who harm him, answer to me." The warriors responded with a coordinated movement, thumping the butts of their spears against the ground 3 times in unison. The sound was like thunder rolling across the plateau. The procession reformed with the same precision they had shown in their approach, and began the journey back down the path toward the valley. Emina waved to Jordan before taking her place beside her mother, her young face split by a grin that showed how pleased she was with how the meeting had gone. Gabrali did not look back, but Jordan knew with absolute certainty that she was aware of his eyes on her, that she could feel his gaze as clearly as if he had touched her. Rolly whined softly, a sound of curiosity and mild concern. Jordan looked down at the dog and scratched behind his ears absently, his mind already racing ahead to what the evening might bring. "Looks like we are going to a party," he said to the dog, his voice carrying a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "What do you think about that?" Rolly's tail wagged once. Then he settled down on the porch to resume his interrupted nap. For a dog, life was simple. For Jordan, things had just gotten considerably more complicated. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange and deep crimson, two warriors arrived to escort Jordan to the settlement. One introduced herself as Basari, a lean woman with scars decorating her arms like badges of honor and a bow slung across her back that looked like it could shoot an arrow clean through a tree. Her face was angular and sharp, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, with the awareness of someone who had survived by staying alert. The other was Cora, younger than Basari by perhaps a decade, less marked by battle, but no less dangerous for that. Her eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing, evaluating Jordan with the kind of careful assessment that soldiers gave to potential allies or enemies. Jordan had changed into his cleanest combat fatigues and his tactical vest, the one without too many tears or stains that could not be washed out. He carried his knife openly, as Gabrali had requested, the blade riding comfortably on his thigh, where years of muscle memory knew exactly how to find it. Rolly walked at his heel, his presence a comfort and a reminder that Jordan was not entirely alone in this strange new situation. The journey took them down into the valley through terrain Jordan had never explored in his 7 years on this world. He had deliberately limited his wanderings, staying close to his cabin, avoiding contact with others. Now he was being led into the heart of Kasu territory, and he observed everything with the trained eye of someone who might need to navigate this road in darkness or under hostile conditions. The land changed as they walked, becoming greener and more lush the further they descended from the barren plateau. Hidden springs fed patches of vegetation that seemed impossibly vibrant compared to the harsh purple scrub that dominated the higher elevations. Flowering plants grew in profusion wherever water collected, their blooms ranging from pure white to deep purple, filling the air with scents that were alien but not unpleasant. Birds with iridescent feathers flitted between branches, singing songs that Jordan's ears could not quite parse into recognizable patterns. They entered a canyon that Jordan would have sworn was impassable, its mouth choked with fallen rocks and dense vegetation. But Basari led them through a narrow cleft in the rocks that was invisible until you were almost on top of it, a passage barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through walking sideways. The walls pressed close, smooth stone worn by the passage of countless generations of Kasu moving to and from their hidden home. The cleft opened suddenly into a hidden valley, and Jordan stopped at the entrance, genuinely impressed despite himself. He had seen countless military installations during his service, had visited cities on a dozen worlds, but this place had a beauty that was entirely natural and entirely deliberate at the same time. The settlement was built into the canyon walls themselves, integrated so completely with the natural rock that it was sometimes difficult to tell where geology ended and architecture began. Structures seemed to grow from the stone, their walls carved and shaped rather than constructed from separate materials. Openings served as windows and doors, positioned to catch light and air, to provide views and ventilation. Vines and flowering plants grew over everything, encouraged rather than removed, softening the hard edges of rock and creating a living tapestry of color. Bridges connected different levels of the settlement, graceful arches of stone or woven rope and wood that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Water flowed through channels cut into the stone, creating a constant musical sound as it moved from level to level, falling in small waterfalls before being collected in pools and channels that supplied the settlement's needs. In the center of the valley, occupying a circular plaza paved with smooth stones, a massive bonfire blazed. Its flames reached high into the darkening sky, fed by carefully stacked wood that burned with colors Jordan had never seen fire produce before. Blues and greens mixed with the normal oranges and reds, creating a display that was both beautiful and slightly unsettling. Around the fire, hundreds of Kasu had gathered, their voices creating a low hum of conversation and laughter that spoke of a community at peace with itself. Jordan felt the weight of their attention as he entered the plaza, felt hundreds of eyes turning toward him with curiosity and wariness. Conversations died mid-sentence, heads turned, Children stopped their games to stare at the strange being in their midst. He was the only human for miles, possibly for hundreds of miles. Definitely the only one in this valley. He was alien to them, strange in his paleness, different in his features, potentially dangerous in ways they could not fully assess. He kept his stride confident but not aggressive, his expression calm and open. He had walked into hostile territory before, had crossed lines into enemy camps under flags of truce, had stood before hostile crowds and negotiated from positions of weakness. This was just another situation to navigate, another test of composure and awareness. Gabrali was waiting near the fire, and the sight of her drove every tactical thought from Jordan's mind for a long moment. She wore robes of silver that caught the firelight and seemed to glow with their own internal luminescence. The fabric moved like liquid as she walked, clinging to her form in ways that were simultaneously modest and provocative. Her hair was unbound now, falling in waves past her shoulders, the silver strands catching light and transforming it into something magical. She smiled when she saw him, a genuine expression of pleasure that transformed her face from merely beautiful to absolutely stunning. "Jordan," she said, speaking his name with careful precision, rolling the syllables in her mouth like she was tasting something precious. "Welcome to our home. Welcome to the heart of the Starlight clan." She guided him to a place of honor near the fire, to a section where cushions had been arranged in a circle on woven mats. The elders of the clan sat here, Jordan realized as he looked at the assembled Kasu, along with the most respected warriors and the heads of the most important families. These were the decision makers, the power structure of the clan made visible. Gabreli sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Food was brought out in a procession that spoke of ritual and celebration. Warriors and younger Kasu carried platters and bowls, setting them on low tables within easy reach of the honored guests. Roasted meat from animals Jordan did not recognize, the flesh dark and marbled with fat that smelled incredible. Bread made from grain he could not name, formed into intricate shapes and patterns, still warm from whatever ovens had produced it. Fruits in a rainbow of colors, some familiar in general shape if not specific type, others completely alien. Vegetables both raw and cooked, seasoned with spices that made his mouth water. Wine in ceramic vessels, dark and rich-looking, the aroma suggesting complexity and age. Gabrali explained each dish as it was presented, her voice low and intimate, meant only for Jordan's ears. She would lean close to speak, her breath warm against his ear, her hand occasionally touching his arm for emphasis. "This is thornback," she said, indicating a piece of meat that was almost purple in color. "The animal is dangerous to hunt, covered in spines that can pierce armor and inject venom. But the meat is sweet and tender, and we only serve it on the most special occasions because taking one requires skill and bravery." Jordan tasted it, finding that she had not exaggerated. The flavor was rich and complex, sweet but with undertones that he could not identify, melting on his tongue in a way that suggested slow cooking and careful preparation. "And this," she continued, holding up a purple fruit that fit easily in her palm, "is called moonberry. It grows only during the night, opening its flowers after sunset and closing them before dawn. It must be picked in that narrow window or it withers on the vine. The taste is what you would call tart, I think, sharp and bright like lightning on the tongue." "Tart," Jordan confirmed, accepting the fruit from her hand. Their fingers touched briefly in the transfer, and he felt the warmth of her skin, noticed the way it seemed to vibrate with a subtle energy. He bit into the fruit, and his mouth flooded with flavor, sharp and sweet and complex all at once. Gabrali noticed his reaction to touching her skin. "You can feel it," she said, her voice dropping even lower, becoming even more intimate. "The resonance. When we are calm and content, when we feel safe and happy, our bodies vibrate at a frequency that others can sometimes sense. It is part of how we are made, part of our biology. When we are distressed or angry or frightened, the frequency changes, becomes harsher, more discordant. It is how we communicate emotion to each other without words, how we know the true state of another's mind and heart." "Interesting," Jordan said, genuinely fascinated by this insight into Kasu biology. "Humans do not have anything like that. We have to rely on facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, all things that can be faked or misinterpreted. We have those things too, Gabrali said, shifting slightly closer to him, close enough that her thigh pressed against his. But the resonance is deeper, more honest. It is very difficult to hide what we truly feel from someone who knows how to read it. Almost impossible to lie convincingly when your very skin betrays your emotional state. She let that hang in the air between them for a moment, then continued. My resonance now, for example, is faster than normal, higher pitched. If you had the ability to hear it properly, you would know exactly what I am feeling. You would know that I find you attractive, that I am drawn to you in ways that go beyond simple gratitude. Jordan felt his own heart rate increase in response to her words, felt heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. I do not need to hear your resonance to know that, he said quietly. Your eyes tell me everything I need to know. Gabrali laughed, a sound like water flowing over smooth stones, musical and unforced. Then we understand each other. That is good. That makes things simpler. The feast continued around them, a celebration of life and community. The Kasu laughed and talked, their voices rising and falling in patterns that suggested stories being told, jokes being shared, arguments being had and resolved. Children ran between the adults, playing games that involved much shrieking and chasing, their high voices adding another layer to the complex soundscape. Warriors traded tales of hunts and battles, their hands moving expressively as they acted out their stories. Musicians began to play, adding deliberate music to the ambient noise. Their instruments produced sounds unlike anything Jordan had heard before, a blend of drums that resonated deep in his chest, strings that sang with haunting clarity, and something that created a sound like wind through metal pipes, ethereal and slightly otherworldly. The music built slowly, layers adding on top of layers, creating something complex and beautiful. Gabrali leaned close to Jordan again, close enough that he could smell the scent of her hair, something floral and clean. I must tell you something, she said, her breath warm against his ear, sending shivers down his spine. There is a reason I am paying you so much attention, a reason beyond simple gratitude for saving Amina. Though that would be enough on its own. My people are watching us. They see their chief sitting with a warrior from another world, showing clear favor and interest, and they wonder if this means something. They wonder if it could mean something significant. Jordan turned his head to look at her, finding their faces only inches apart. He could see the individual facets of color in her green eyes, could see the way her pupils dilated slightly as he met her gaze. And what do you want it to mean? He asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the music and conversation. Gabrali's eyes searched his face, looking for something she seemed to find. I want it to mean that sometimes, two people can find something unexpected in the most unlikely circumstances. That strength recognizes strength regardless of the color of skin, or the shape of ears, or the world where someone was born. I am attracted to you, Jordan. Your courage when you saved my daughter, your competence in everything I have observed, the way you did not hesitate to risk your life for a child you did not know. These things speak to something deep in me, something I thought I had buried years ago after my last mate died in battle. Jordan felt his breath catch in his chest. He had come here seeking isolation, seeking escape from connections and complications. I left my old life to be alone, he said honestly. I did not think I wanted this kind of connection again. I did not think I was capable of it anymore. And yet here you are, Gabrali said softly, her hand finding his where it rested on his knee. Sitting beside me, not pulling away, your heart beating faster, your eyes showing interest despite your words. She was right, and they both knew it. He was not pulling away. Part of him wanted to retreat to the safety of solitude and the comfortable numbness that came with isolation. But another part, a part that had been dormant for 7 years, was waking up, wanting, hoping, believing that perhaps it was not too late, that perhaps he could find something worth staying for. The music changed, becoming more rhythmic and insistent. The Kasu began to stand, abandoning their food and conversations, forming lines and circles around the fire. A dance was beginning, something ritualistic and important. Gabrali stood and offered Jordan her hand, her eyes holding a challenge and an invitation all at once. "Dance with me," she said, and there was no question in her voice, only certainty that he would accept. Jordan took her hand and let her pull him to his feet, feeling the strength in her grip, the sureness of her movement. They moved into the circle together, and the dance began in earnest. It was nothing like the formal dances Jordan had attended on Earth or on the various colony worlds during diplomatic functions. Those had been refined, controlled, governed by rigid rules of propriety and tradition. This was something primal and physical, something that spoke to older instincts and deeper connections. Bodies moved in synchronization, feet pounding the ground in complex patterns that created their own rhythm to complement the music. Arms rose and fell, heads turned in unison. It was part celebration, part combat drill, part ritual, requiring strength and coordination and awareness of everyone around you. Gabrali led him through the steps, her hands guiding his movements when he faltered or hesitated. Jordan found that his military training helped more than he had expected. The patterns were similar to the drills he had run with his Marines, exercises designed to build teamwork and awareness of your partner's position in space. Move together, breathe together, become one unit. They moved together, and Jordan felt the resonance in Gabrali's skin changing, speeding up, matching his own heartbeat in some way he could not fully explain. Sweat beaded on both their foreheads despite the cooling evening air. The firelight made their skin glow, his pale and scarred, hers blue and smooth. Their eyes locked and held as they moved through the pattern, speaking without words, communicating on levels that transcended language. The dance brought them close together, then spun them apart, then brought them crashing back together with controlled force. Each time they touched, Jordan felt the connection between them grow stronger, felt something building that went beyond simple physical attraction. There was recognition here, a sense that they were matched in ways that mattered, equally strong, equally determined, equally damaged by their past, and equally hungry for something better in their futures. The music reached a crescendo and stopped with sudden finality. The dancers froze in position, holding their final poses. Jordan and Gabrali were face to face, her hands on his shoulders, his hands on her waist, close enough that he could feel her breath on his face. They were both breathing hard, their hearts pounding in their chests. Around them, the other Kasu were watching with open interest, making no attempt to hide their curiosity or their speculation. Gabrali did not seem to care about their attention. She leaned in close, her lips nearly touching Jordan's ear, her voice so low that only he could possibly hear it. "There is something else you should know," she whispered, her words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. "Something I have not told you yet. We are in danger, real danger. Raiders called the Vix have been attacking settlements to the north for the past 6 months. They take what they want and leave nothing but ash and bodies. My scouts report that they are moving systematically southward, following the mineral deposits that interest them. We have perhaps a week, maybe 2 if we are lucky, before they reach our borders." Jordan's mind snapped into tactical mode instantly, his military training taking over, even as his body remained in the dance pose. "What are their numbers?" he asked, his voice just as quiet as hers. "What kind of weapons do they have? How are they organized?" "Too many to count accurately," Gabrali said, and he could hear the fear beneath her strength. "My scouts estimate at least 3 ships, each carrying perhaps 50 warriors. Their weapons shoot fire and metal from a distance, things our armor cannot stop. They have machines that can level our homes, that can dig through solid rock. We are skilled warriors, but we fight with spears and bows and blades. Against their technology, we are children throwing stones at storm." "You are asking me to train your warriors," Jordan said, understanding the true purpose of this evening, understanding why she had brought him here and shown him favor. "You need someone who understands how to fight against advanced weapons." "I am asking you to help us survive," Gabrali replied, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "Not as a chief asking a friend of the clan, not as a diplomat negotiating an alliance, as a woman asking a man she believes can save her people, as someone who has already lost too much to war and cannot bear to lose everything that remains." Jordan felt the weight of her words settle onto his shoulders like physical burden. 7 years ago, He had walked away from war with blood on his hands and screams in his dreams. He had sworn he was done with fighting, with killing, with the endless cycle of violence that consumed lives and souls with equal appetite. He had come here to escape all of that, to find peace in isolation, to let the soldier in him finally die and rest. But looking at Gabrali, seeing the fear beneath her strength and the hope in her eyes, seeing the people celebrating around them who had no idea what was coming for them, he knew he could not refuse. Some part of him had always known he could not refuse, that the warrior in him was not dead, but only sleeping, waiting for a reason to wake. "I will help you," he said, the words feeling like both a promise and a surrender. "I will do what I can to prepare your people, to give them a chance against what is coming." Gabrali's resonance changed again, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over him so strongly that he could feel it through her hands on his shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, and there were tears in her eyes now, glittering in the firelight. "Thank you." She took his hand and led him away from the fire, away from the watching eyes of her people and the celebration that continued without them. They walked through the settlement, climbing stairs carved into the canyon wall, crossing bridges that swayed gently under their combined weight. No one tried to stop them or question where they were going. This was the chief, and she could go where she pleased with whom she pleased. They reached a structure carved high into the canyon wall, accessible only by a narrow bridge and a steep climb. Inside was a single room, simply furnished but beautiful in its simplicity. The walls were carved with images of stars and moons, constellations that Jordan did not recognize but understood were significant to Kasu culture and spirituality. A bed made from soft furs and woven cloth occupied one corner, large enough for two. A window carved from the rock looked out over the valley, showing the twin moons rising in the sky, exactly as Gabrali had promised, climbing together from behind the eastern mountains. This was a private place, Jordan realized immediately, a place where Gabrali could be herself, could shed the mantle of leadership and simply be a woman with hopes and fears and desires. She turned to face him, and her hands went to the clasp of her silver robes with clear intention. Jordan caught her wrist gently, stopping her movement. "Are you sure?" he asked, needing to know that this was not just gratitude or political calculation. "This is not just about tonight. If we do this, it changes things. For you, for me, for your people. They will see this as significant. They will interpret it as a statement." Gabrali smiled, and there was nothing uncertain in her expression. "I am very sure," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I have thought about little else since I first saw you standing on your porch in your armor, looking like a warrior from our oldest legends. I want this. I want you. Not because you can help us fight, though that matters. Not because it would be politically useful, though it would be. I want you because when I look at you, I feel something I have not felt since my mate died. I feel alive again. I feel possibility." Jordan released her wrists and helped her remove the silver robes, his hands gentle despite their size and the calluses that covered them. The fabric whispered as it fell away, revealing her body in the moonlight that streamed through the window. Her skin was smooth and unmarked by scars, the deep blue of evening sky, the resonance in her body creating a sensation beneath his fingers, like touching a living instrument that hummed with barely contained energy. She undressed him in turn, her fingers tracing the scars that mapped his history across his chest and back and arms. Each mark was a story, a battle survived, a wound healed. She touched them with reverence rather than pity, understanding that they were part of what had made him who he was. They came together with urgency tempered by tenderness, exploring the differences and similarities of their bodies with curiosity and growing passion. Gabrali gasped when she felt the heat that radiated from Jordan's skin, a warmth that her species did not naturally produce, finding it both strange and wonderful. Jordan marveled at the way her resonance increased with pleasure, the vibrations creating sensations he had never experienced before, had never imagined were possible. Her skin sang beneath his touch, changing frequencies as he discovered what pleased her, what made her breath catch and her back arch. They learned each other slowly despite their urgency, taking time to understand reactions and responses, building towards something that left them both gasping and shaking. When they finally came together completely, It felt like something clicking into place, like two pieces that had been searching for their match finally finding it. Afterward, they lay tangled together, their bodies slick with sweat, their hearts gradually slowing from their frantic pace. Gabrielle rested her head on Jordan's chest, listening to his heartbeat, her hand tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "In my culture," she said softly, her voice drowsy with satisfaction, "when a chief takes a partner, it is seen as a sign of unity and strength. It means I believe this person can stand beside me, can help me lead, can be trusted with the future of our people. My clan will understand what this means when they see us tomorrow." Jordan stroked her hair, feeling the strange texture of it, like silk but heavier, substantial. "And what about what we want?" he asked. "What about choosing to be with someone just because you want to be with them, regardless of politics or duty?" Gabrali laughed, the sound rumbling through both their bodies where they touched. "That too. Do not misunderstand me. I am not with you because it is politically convenient or strategically smart. I am with you because when I look at you, when I touch you, when I hear your voice, I feel something I thought I would never feel again. Hope, connection, the sense that I am not alone in carrying the weight of leadership and responsibility." Jordan understood that feeling all too well. "I feel it too," he admitted, the words coming easier than he had expected. "I came here to be alone, to escape from connections and obligations. But maybe what I really needed was to find the right connection, the right person to share the burden with." They slept eventually, wrapped in each other's warmth, lulled by the distant sounds of the celebration continuing in the valley below. Dawn came too soon, announced by light streaming through the window and urgent voices outside the room. Jordan woke instantly, his military training pulling him from sleep to full alertness in seconds. Gabrielle was already sitting up, her body tense, her resonance shifting to something harsh and discordant. Basiri appeared in the doorway, her face grim and streaked with dirt, as if she had been running hard. "Chief," she said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "The scouts have returned from the northern territories. The Vic ships are closer than we thought. They have reached the northern ridge, perhaps 2 days' hard march from our valley. And there is worse news." "What news?" Gabrali demanded, already reaching for her robes, her movements sharp and efficient. "Emina is missing," Basiri said, and Jordan saw the warrior's hands tremble slightly as she delivered the words. "She left before dawn with the patrol that went to the Crystal Caves to check if the recent rains had caused any flooding. They have not returned, and it has been 4 hours since they should have reported back." Jordan was on his feet instantly, pulling on his clothes with speed born of countless emergency mobilizations. "How many in the patrol?" he asked, his voice calm and professional despite the ice forming in his stomach. 4 warriors plus Emina," Basiri answered, looking to him for guidance already, recognizing command when she saw it. "All experienced, all armed, but the caves can be dangerous even for those who know them well." Gabrielle's face was a mask of controlled terror, and Jordan recognized that expression from 100 briefings and 1,000 missions. It was the look of a parent trying to stay functional while their child was in danger, trying to think tactically when every instinct screamed to run blindly toward the threat. "I need my gear," Jordan said, his mind already shifting into combat mode, already planning. "Weapons, supplies, whatever you can spare. And I need someone who knows the caves, knows the fastest routes and the most dangerous sections." "I will come with you," Gabrali said immediately, her voice hard and determined. "She is my daughter." Jordan shook his head, placing his hands on her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. "Your people need you here. If the Vics are as close as Basiri says, you need to start preparations immediately. Evacuate the children and the elderly to the deepest caves. Organize your warriors. Set up defensive positions. I will find Emina and bring her back." Gabrali grabbed his arms, her grip painfully tight, her resonance chaotic with fear and desperation. "She is my daughter, my only child. If something happens to her, if she dies because I let her go, if I lose her the way I lost her father—" "Nothing will happen to her," Jordan interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty and command. "I did not save her from a pit just to let her die in a cave. I promise you, Gabrali, I will bring her back to you safely. Trust me." Gabrali stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something she seemed to find. Finally, she nodded, though tears were streaming down her face. "Basiri, go with him," she ordered, her voice breaking slightly. "Cora, too. Take Brian from the morning patrol. He knows the caves better than anyone. Give him whatever he needs. And Jordan," her voice broke entirely, "please, bring her back to me." "I will," Jordan promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I swear it on everything I am." Within minutes, Jordan was equipped for combat and rescue. Basiri had provided him with a sturdy spear, its shaft made from some dense wood, and its blade wickedly sharp. A bow with 24 arrows, the bow surprisingly powerful for its size. A coil of rope that was thinner than earth rope, but supposedly just as strong. Cora had gathered additional supplies, packing them into a lightweight backpack. Food, water, medical materials, torches, flint and steel for fire. Brian turned out to be a young male Kasu, perhaps 20 years old, with deep blue skin and nervous energy. He carried a pack of climbing equipment and wore an expression that suggested he was both excited and terrified to be going on this mission. The four of them set out at a run, Rolly at Jordan's heels sensing the urgency and matching it with his own controlled intensity. Basiri led them north through terrain that grew progressively rougher, following trails that were barely visible to Jordan's eyes but apparently clear to her. As they ran, Jordan questioned Basiri about the Vix, gathering intelligence the way he had been trained. She told him they were a species of conquerors and scavengers, raiders who traveled from world to world, stripping planets of valuable resources before moving on to the next target. They had no interest in diplomacy or coexistence, only in taking what they wanted as efficiently as possible. They had landed on this world 6 months ago, establishing a base camp somewhere to the north, and had been systematically destroying settlements ever since. "Why has the Galactic Federation not intervened?" Jordan asked, even though he suspected he already knew the answer. Basiri spat on the ground, an expression of disgust that transcended species. "This world is too remote, too poor. We have no strategic resources that matter to the great powers, no technology they want, no position that gives military advantage. We have sent messages pleading for help, and they respond with sympathy and promises to investigate. But no ships come. No Marines arrive to push back the raiders. We are on our own." Jordan's jaw tightened with anger he thought he had left behind. He knew exactly how that worked, had seen it happen on a dozen worlds during his service. The Federation talked big about protecting all member worlds, but the reality was simpler and uglier. If you did not have something the big powers wanted, if your suffering did not threaten their interests, you were on your own. The Marines went where they were sent, and they were sent where politics and economics dictated, not where they were needed most. They reached the entrance to the crystal caves just after midday, when the sun was at its zenith and beat down with punishing intensity. The opening was a vertical crack in a cliff face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through walking sideways. Up close, Jordan could see that the crack was not natural, but had been widened by tools over many generations, chiseled and shaped to make passage easier. Basiri produced a gem from a pouch at her belt that began to glow with soft blue light when she held it up and concentrated on it. The light was not bright enough to hurt the eyes, but clear enough to see by in darkness. "A beacon gem," she explained, seeing Jordan's curiosity. "It will lead us to any other beacon gems nearby. The patrol would have carried one. Standard procedure for any cave expedition. As long as theirs is intact, we can track them." They entered the caves, leaving Rolly outside with instructions to stay in guard. The dog whined in protest but obeyed, settling down near the entrance to wait. Jordan took a moment to scratch behind his ears. "Good boy," he said quietly. "We will be back." Inside, the caves opened into a vast network of chambers and tunnels that seemed to go on forever. The walls glittered with embedded crystals that caught and refracted the light from the beacon gem, creating a dazzling display of color and light. Under other circumstances, Jordan might have appreciated the beauty, might have taken time to examine the formations and marvel at the natural wonders. Now, all he cared about was finding Amina and getting her out alive. Basiri led them deeper, following the pull of the beacon gem like a compass needle pointing north. The air grew cooler and damper the further they descended. Water dripped from the ceiling in a constant rhythm, creating pools on the uneven floor that had to be skirted or waded through. The sound echoed strangely in the enclosed spaces, making it impossible to judge distances accurately. They found the patrol in a large chamber deep in the cave system, so deep that Jordan had lost track of how far they had descended. 4 Kasu warriors lay on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Their weapons lay scattered around them, and their beacon gem sat beside them, still glowing softly. But Amina was not with them. Cora knelt beside the warriors and began examining them with practiced efficiency, checking pulses and pupils and breathing patterns. "They have been drugged," she announced after a moment, her voice tight with concern. "Some kind of gas, I think, probably introduced into the cave system deliberately. They will wake eventually, but not soon. We need to get them out of here." Jordan scanned the chamber with tactical eyes looking for clues. The walls were scarred with fresh marks, as if something heavy had been dragged across them, gouging into the stone. Tools lay abandoned in corners, picks and shovels that looked Kasu in design. And there was a sound, distant but growing steadily louder. A rhythmic grinding, like massive gears turning, like machinery operating at scale. "Machines," Jordan said, his voice flat with certainty. "The Vics are already here. They are already mining." Basari's face went pale beneath her blue skin. "The heart gems," she said, horror creeping into her voice. "They are mining the heart gems. But this section of the caves is unstable. The elders have marked it as dangerous. If they use heavy equipment here, if they create vibrations and stress, the whole system could collapse. Hundreds of tunnels could come down." Even as she spoke, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Dust fell from the ceiling in small showers. Somewhere in the distance, rock groaned under stress, the sound like the earth itself crying out in pain. Jordan's mind raced through scenarios and possibilities. Emina was somewhere in these caves, possibly captured by the Vics, possibly hiding, possibly hurt. The caves were going to collapse, maybe in minutes, maybe in hours, but certainly soon. They had to find her fast. "Which way would they take the gems?" he demanded, grabbing Basari's arm to focus her attention. "If they are mining, where would they set up their operation?" Basari pointed with a shaking hand to a passage on the far side of the chamber, a tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. "That leads to the main vein, the richest deposit of gems in the entire cave system. But we cannot go there. It is too dangerous. The ceiling is barely stable even without mining activity." Jordan was already moving toward the tunnel, his mind made up. "Stay with the wounded," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get them conscious if you can. Prepare to evacuate. If I am not back in 30 minutes, get out and seal the entrance." "Jordan, you will die," Basiri called after him, her voice raw with fear and admiration. "The caves will kill you even if the Vics do not." He did not answer. He was already in the passage, moving fast, the bow ready in his hands and his mind focused with absolute clarity. Fear was useless. Doubt was a luxury he could not afford. There was only the mission: find Amina, extract her, get out alive. Everything else was just noise. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, forcing Jordan to brace himself against the walls to control his descent. The surface was slick with moisture, treacherous underfoot, and the grinding sound of machinery grew louder with each step. The air became warmer, thick with the smell of burning rock and hot metal, harsh chemicals that made his eyes water. Jordan moved as quietly as possible despite his urgency, using every trick of stealth he had learned in 15 years of combat. He tested each footfall before committing his weight, avoiding loose stones that might clatter and announce his presence. He controlled his breathing, keeping it slow and steady despite the exertion and the adrenaline flooding his system. The tunnel opened suddenly into an enormous cavern, and Jordan pressed himself against the wall in the shadows, assessing the scene before him with trained eyes. The cavern was massive, its ceiling lost in shadow far above, but the floor was lit by harsh, artificial lights mounted on drilling machines that looked like they had been designed by someone with no concept of subtlety or grace. The machines were all brutal functionality, metal in power, tearing into the cave walls with diamond-tipped drills that screamed and threw up showers of sparks. The Vics had set up a full industrial operation in the heart of the sacred caves, violating a place of spiritual significance with machinery and greed. The Vix themselves were exactly as Basiri had described, and seeing them in person sent a chill down Jordan's spine. They were insectoid, their bodies covered in dark chitinous armor that looked nearly impenetrable. They stood upright on two powerful legs, but they had four arms, each ending in a three-fingered claw that could probably crush bone with ease. Their heads were dominated by compound eyes that probably gave them nearly 360-degree vision, and clicking mandibles that made sounds like conversation or possibly just the mechanical grinding of their biology. Jordan counted quickly and methodically. 20 Vix in the cavern, operating machines or hauling containers of heart gems toward a ramp that had been carved into the far wall, leading up toward the surface. The containers glowed with the pulsing light of the gems inside them, stolen treasure ripped from the earth without permission or respect. And there, in a cage near the back of the cavern, half hidden by stacked equipment, Jordan saw what he had come for. Emina was conscious, thank whatever gods watched over this world. She was standing at the bars of her cage, her small hands wrapped around the metal, her face streaked with tears, but her expression defiant rather than broken. She was alive. She was whole. She was angry rather than terrified, which meant her spirit had not been crushed. Jordan felt relief wash through him so powerfully it was almost painful, but he could not allow himself to celebrate yet. He still had to get her out, and the odds were terrible. 20 armed enemies, one prisoner in a locked cage, no backup, and a cave system that was literally falling apart around them. He had faced worse. Not much worse, but worse. Jordan circled the cavern silently, using the shadows and the noise of the machines to conceal his movement. The Vix were focused on their work, confident in their superiority, arrogant in their assumption that no one would dare challenge them here. That arrogance would cost them. He selected his first target with care, a Vix standing guard near a stack of equipment, slightly separated from the others. Jordan knocked an arrow, drew the bow, and aimed for the only vulnerable spot he could see, the joint between the creature's head and thorax where the armor had to be thinner to allow for movement. He released. The arrow flew true, driven by strength and skill, and took the Vix exactly where Jordan had aimed. The creature collapsed without making a sound beyond the clatter of its body hitting stone. 1 down. 19 to go. Jordan moved immediately, never staying in one position long enough to be tracked. He took down 3 more Vix before the others realized they were under attack, each arrow finding the gap in armor with lethal precision. The alarm began to wail, a harsh electronic shriek that filled the cavern. The machines shut down with grinding protests. Vix warriors grabbed weapons, energy rifles that glowed with barely contained power, and began to search the cavern with systematic efficiency. Jordan had expected this, had planned for it. He used the chaos to his advantage, moving constantly, taking shots when he had them, conserving his arrows because each one might mean the difference between success and failure. He fired from behind rocks, from elevated positions, from the shadows where the Vix lights did not quite reach. But he was only one man, and they were many. Soon enough, they had pinned down his general location, even if they could not see him clearly. Energy bolts scorched the rock near his head, superheated air making his skin feel like it was burning. One bolt came close enough that he felt his hair singe, smelled the acrid scent of burned keratin. The cavern shook violently, more violently than before. A massive chunk of the ceiling crashed down, crushing one of the drilling machines and the Vix operating it in a spray of rock and sparks and alien blood. The remaining Vix chittered in alarm, their confidence finally shaken, their assumption of invulnerability cracking. Jordan saw his opportunity in that moment of chaos. He sprinted across the open floor, drawing his knife as he ran, abandoning stealth for speed and aggression. A Vix tried to intercept him, raising a weapon. Jordan ducked under its arms, his combat training making his movements fluid and instinctive, and drove his knife upward into the softer armor of its thorax. He felt the blade punch through chitin and into whatever organs lay beneath, felt the Vix convulse and fall. He reached Amina's cage and examined the lock with desperate speed. It was electronic, sophisticated, completely beyond his ability to pick or bypass. But the bars themselves were metal, just metal, not energy fields or anything exotic. "Cover your eyes," he told Amina, his voice sharp with command. She obeyed instantly, pressing her face against her arms. Jordan grabbed an energy rifle from a fallen Vix and fired at the lock at point-blank range, hoping the weapon's power would be enough. The metal melted and dripped like water, glowing white-hot. He kicked the cage door with all his strength, feeling it give way, feeling the heated metal sear through his boot but not caring. He pulled Amina out, checking her quickly for injuries. "Can you run?" he demanded. She nodded, her face set with determination, despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "Yes." "Then run," he said, pointing back toward the passage he had used to enter. "Back the way I came. Do not stop for anything. Do not look back. Just run." But Amina did not move. She was staring past Jordan, her eyes wide with terror that was different from before, deeper and more fundamental. Jordan turned and saw what had frozen her. A Vix commander was approaching, massive compared to the others, its armor decorated with symbols that probably denoted rank and achievement. It stood perhaps 7 feet tall, its 4 arms carrying weapons that made the rifles look like toys. Its compound eyes were fixed on Jordan with what he interpreted as rage, or possibly just hunger. The cavern shook again, more violently than ever before. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading like lightning across the stone. Water began to pour through some of the cracks, not dripping but gushing, underground rivers breaking through barriers that had held them back for millennia. Jordan pushed Amina behind him, shielding her with his body, and raised his spear. The commander fired one of its weapons. Jordan dove to the side, feeling the heat of the energy bolt pass inches from his skin, feeling the air crack with displaced energy. He came up throwing the spear with every ounce of strength he possessed, with technique perfected over countless training sessions in actual combat. It was a perfect throw, the kind that warriors dream about but rarely achieve. The spear flew straight and true, punching through the commander's compound eye with the force of Jordan's desperation and skill combined. It penetrated deep, destroying whatever alien brain controlled that massive body. The Vix commander collapsed, its weapons firing randomly as its nervous system misfired, cutting down 2 of its own warriors before it hit the ground. But the damage was already done. The vibrations from the weapons fire, the stress from the drilling, the water breaking through, it was too much for the compromised structure. The cave system was failing catastrophically. Jordan grabbed Amina and ran, his legs pumping with everything he had left. Rock fell around them like deadly rain, each impact like a bomb going off, filling the air with choking dust and deadly shrapnel. The passage they had entered through was blocked now, sealed by tons of fallen rock. Jordan's mind raced through options with desperate speed. There had to be another way out. The Vix had carved a ramp for hauling out the gems. That ramp had to lead somewhere, had to connect to the surface eventually. "This way," he shouted to Amina, changing direction, pulling her toward where he remembered seeing the ramp. They ran together, Jordan half dragging the child when she stumbled, both of them coughing on the dust that filled the air. They found the ramp just as another section of ceiling came down, blocking it partially but leaving a gap large enough to squeeze through. Jordan pushed Amina through first, then followed, feeling rock scrape against his armor, feeling the passage trying to close on him like jaws. They emerged into a tunnel that was clearly artificial, carved by Vix machinery for Vix purposes. It sloped upward at a steady angle, the walls smooth and regular. Jordan could see daylight ahead, blessed daylight that meant escape and survival. But the tunnel was collapsing too, section by section, the failure propagating through the entire structure. They ran up the slope, their lungs burning, their legs screaming in protest. Behind them, they could hear the thunder of the cave system destroying itself, millions of tons of rock shifting and falling and crushing everything in its path. Jordan saw the exit ahead, perhaps 50 feet away. They were going to make it. They had to make it. A section of roof gave way behind them. A wave of debris rushed up the ramp, faster than Jordan could run, a tsunami of rock and dust that picked them both up and threw them forward like leaves in a hurricane. Jordan twisted in midair, wrapping his body around Amina to protect her the way he had been trained to protect wounded soldiers. They hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs, and slid the last 20 feet out of the cave mouth on a carpet of debris. They lay in the sunlight, coughing and gasping, covered in dust and small cuts. Behind them, the entire cave system collapsed with a sound like the end of the world, sending up a massive cloud of dust that blotted out the sun and turned day into twilight. Jordan checked Amina immediately, his hands gentle despite his own injuries. She was bruised, frightened, exhausted, but alive, whole, safe. He had kept his promise to Gabrali. "You saved me again," Amina said, her voice hoarse from dust and screaming. "That is twice now. Why do you keep saving me?" Jordan brushed dust from her hair with shaking hands, feeling the adrenaline start to fade and leave weakness in its wake. "Because that is what you do for people you care about," he said, his voice rough with emotion he had not known he still had. "You save them, no matter what, no matter the cost." They rested for a few precious minutes, letting their bodies recover from the impossible strain. Then Jordan helped Amina to her feet, and they began the journey back to the valley, moving slowly because both of them were barely capable of walking, much less running. Basiri and Cora met them halfway, having successfully evacuated the injured patrol members, along with Brian's help. The warriors had regained consciousness and could walk with assistance. Rolly was with them, the dog bounding forward to greet Jordan with enthusiasm that almost knocked him over in his weakened state. Basiri took one look at Jordan and Amina and let out a breath of relief so deep it was almost a sob. "Thank the ancestors," she said fervently. "Chief Gabrali has been almost mad with worry. She wanted to come after you herself. It took 4 of us to convince her she needed to stay and organize the defenses." "The defenses?" Jordan asked, his tactical mind immediately focusing despite his exhaustion. "The Vics are attacking already?" Basiri's expression went grim. "Their main force was spotted an hour ago. 3 ships, heavily armed, moving fast toward the valley. We have perhaps 2 hours before they arrive, maybe less." Jordan felt his exhaustion fall away, replaced by the cold clarity that always came when lives were on the line. "Then we need to move faster. Cora, can you take Amina and the injured directly to the valley? I need to speak with Gabrali immediately about defensive positions." They formed a protective group around the wounded and the child, moving as fast as the slowest member could manage. Jordan's mind was already racing ahead, planning, calculating, assessing their limited resources against the coming threat. They reached the valley entrance as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire that seemed ominously appropriate. Gabrali was there, surrounded by her warriors and elders, coordinating the organized chaos of a community preparing for war. When she saw Amina, Gabrali's composure cracked completely. She ran forward and swept her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly that Amina made a small sound of protest. Gabrali was crying openly, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with relief so intense it was almost painful to witness. "You are safe," she whispered over and over, her hands checking Amina for injuries with desperate urgency. "You are safe. You are home." She looked at Jordan over Amina's head, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that communicated more than words ever could. "You brought her back to me," she said, her voice breaking. "As you promised. You kept your word." "I always keep my promises," Jordan replied simply. But there was no time for a proper reunion, no time for the emotional release they all desperately needed. Even as they spoke, scouts came running with updated intelligence. The Vix fleet had been spotted closer than expected, moving faster than anticipated. They had perhaps 90 minutes before the attack began. Gabrali immediately shifted back into command mode, her personal emotions locked away behind the mask of leadership. "Show me what you need," she said to Jordan, her voice steady now, all business. "Tell me how to save my people." Jordan pulled her aside to a vantage point that overlooked the valley's entrance, the natural choke point that would be the key to their defense. He studied the terrain with experienced eyes, seeing possibilities and problems in equal measure. "The valley is defensible," he said, speaking quickly and clearly, making sure she understood every word. "But only if we use every advantage the terrain gives us. The Vix will expect a frontal assault. They will expect you to panic, to break and run when they demonstrate their superior firepower." He pointed to the cliff faces that flanked the narrow canyon entrance. "We put archers there and there. They have the high ground, protected positions behind rocks. The Vix will not be able to target them easily with their energy weapons without exposing themselves to crossfire." Gabrali nodded, following his reasoning, her mind working through the tactical implications. We let them come into the canyon, Jordan continued, his finger tracing the path he envisioned. We do not meet them at the entrance. We let them commit their forces, let them think they are winning, then we trap them. We have positioned warriors here. He indicated spots on either side of the canyon, hidden in prepared positions. When I give the signal, they attack from both sides simultaneously. And the ships? Gabrali asked. Their air support will tear us apart. Jordan smiled grimly. The ships are the key. If we can bring down even one, crash it into their ground forces, it will break their formation and their confidence. I have an idea about that, but I need your biggest heart gems, the most powerful ones you have. Gabrali studied his face for a long moment, then nodded decisively. I trust you, she said simply. What do you need? For the next hour, Jordan worked with Gabrali and her warriors, transforming panic into purpose, fear into determination. He showed them how to set up overlapping fields of fire, how to use the terrain to create killing zones where the Vix would be vulnerable despite their superior weapons. He taught them basic squad tactics, how to move together, how to support each other, how to retreat in good order rather than breaking and running. The Kasu warriors were excellent students, Jordan discovered. They were already skilled fighters with centuries of warrior tradition to draw upon. They just needed someone to show them how to apply their skills against an enemy with advanced technology. Basiri and Cora took to the tactical training with enthusiasm, quickly becoming Jordan's lieutenants, helping to organize the other warriors into effective units. Even young Brian showed unexpected leadership, volunteering to command a unit of archers on the cliff face, despite his obvious fear. As the sun touched the horizon, everything was in place. The archers were positioned on the cliffs, their arrows nocked and ready. Strike teams were hidden in prepared positions, armed with spears and axes, and the fury of people defending their homes. The children and elderly had been evacuated to the deep caves that had not collapsed, protected by a small guard force. And in the center of the valley, Gabrali stood with her elite warriors, the reserve force that would commit only if the defense failed, the last line between the Vix and total annihilation. Jordan positioned himself at the canyon entrance with Rowley and a team of 12 warriors that included Basiri and Cora. They would be the bait, the visible target that would draw the Vix into the trap. The Vix ships appeared as the last light was fading from the sky, their engines screaming like tortured animals. They came in low and fast, their hulls ugly and functional, designed for intimidation and destruction rather than beauty. The ships were larger than Jordan had expected, each one capable of carrying at least 50 warriors, maybe more. They landed in a clearing beyond the canyon entrance, settling onto the ground with mechanical precision. Ramps dropped from their bellies with hydraulic hisses, and Vix warriors poured out in disciplined ranks. Jordan counted methodically, his heart sinking with each additional warrior he tallied. At least 150 Vix, possibly closer to 200. They were heavily armed with energy weapons that hummed with barely contained power, carrying shields that would deflect most primitive projectiles. The odds were worse than terrible. They were nearly impossible. But impossible had never stopped Jordan before. The Vix formed up in precise military ranks, their movements coordinated with mechanical efficiency. They began marching toward the canyon entrance, confident in their strength, certain of their victory. They had crushed dozens of settlements before this one. Why should this be any different? Jordan waited until the bulk of their force was committed to the canyon, until the majority of the Vix warriors were in the confined space where their numbers would work against them. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. This was what he had been trained for. This was what he had spent 15 years learning to do. He raised the horn that Gabrali had given him and blew a single long note, clear and sharp, cutting through the sound of marching feet and humming weapons. Arrows rained down from the cliffs in a devastating volley. The Vix raised their shields, deflecting most of the projectiles, but some found gaps in the defenses. Warriors fell, clutching at arrows that had pierced joints or eye clusters or the softer armor of their thoraxes. Jordan's team emerged from cover, launching spears with practiced coordination. The heavy weapons punched through Vix armor, dropping more of the enemy. But the Vix adapted quickly, forming their shield wall tighter, advancing with more caution. Jordan blew the horn again, A different pattern this time. The signal for Phase 2. The Kasu warriors on the cliffs targeted specific rocks that had been pre-selected for their instability. Rocks that had been partially loosened during the preparation. Arrows struck with precision, dislodging the stones. A landslide cascaded down, crushing Vic's warriors and blocking their advance, creating chaos in their perfect formations. But the Vics were not done. Their ships lifted off with roars of power, beginning to circle above the canyon, their weapons charging with visible light, preparing to blast the defenders from their protected positions. Jordan had anticipated this. He blew the horn a third time, the signal for all warriors to retreat into the deep caves, into positions where the ships could not target them without risking a total collapse that would trap their ground forces. The battle became a grinding war of attrition. The Vics pushed forward slowly. The Kasu held them back desperately. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The canyon floor became littered with bodies from both sides, the stones slick with blood, both blue and dark green. Basiri took a hit from an energy weapon, the bolt burning through her shoulder and dropping her to the ground. Cora dragged her to cover while Jordan provided covering fire, his bow singing with each release, each arrow finding a target. Jordan could see the tide turning against them. The Vics were grinding through their defenses, through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. They needed something to break the stalemate, something dramatic and devastating. He ran to where Gabrali had positioned herself with the reserves, his legs burning with exertion, his lungs heaving. "I need those heart gems now," he shouted over the sound of battle. "The biggest ones you have. This is our only chance." Gabrali did not hesitate. She sent runners to retrieve the gems from the sacred storage, and they returned with 3 massive crystals, each one the size of Jordan's fist, pulsing with powerful light that seemed to have its own rhythm and intelligence. Jordan explained his plan quickly. Gabrali's eyes widened as she understood, but she did not argue. "It is insane," she said. "You could die." "We are all going to die if this does not work," Jordan replied grimly. "This is our only chance to turn this fight." He wrapped 2 of the gems carefully in cloth, protecting them from premature detonation, and secured them to his tactical vest. The third he kept in his hand, feeling its warmth, feeling the energy pulsing through it. Jordan climbed to a high point on the canyon wall, exposing himself to enemy fire in order to get the height and angle he needed. Energy bolts sizzled past him, so close that he could feel their heat, but he forced himself to remain calm and focused. One of the Vic's ships was hovering lower than the others, closer to the canyon entrance, its weapons charging for another devastating barrage against the Kasu positions. That ship was Jordan's target. He took the 3rd heart gem and smashed it against a rock with calculated force, fracturing the crystalline structure. The gem's light intensified immediately, pulsing faster and faster as the energy it contained became unstable. He had perhaps 5 seconds before it exploded, maybe less. Jordan threw the gem at the hovering ship with all the strength and accuracy that 15 years of combat had developed. The throw was perfect, a product of training and desperation combined. The gem struck the ship's underside, right where the engines and power systems would be concentrated. The explosion was massive and beautiful and terrible all at once. Blue light erupted like a miniature star being born, consuming the ship's systems in a cascade of energy that overloaded every circuit and melted every component. The ship's engines screamed in protest, then died. Sparks flew from every seam and joint. Emergency systems tried and failed to compensate. The ship began to spin, losing altitude rapidly, falling from the sky like a stone wrapped in fire. It crashed into the canyon floor with an impact that shook the earth, right in the middle of the concentrated Vic's ground forces. The explosion of fuel and munitions consumed dozens of Vic's warriors in an instant, scattering the rest, breaking their perfect formations into chaos and panic. The remaining Vic's forces broke under the shock of seeing their air support destroyed, under the reality that they were not invincible after all. They began to retreat in disorder, no longer the disciplined military force, but a mob fleeing from unexpected defeat. The Kasu warriors pursued them, harrying them with arrows and spears, making sure the retreat became a rout. They drove the Vics back to their remaining ships, which lifted off hastily and fled into the darkening sky, leaving their dead behind. By the time full darkness fell and the twin moons rose to illuminate the battlefield, the fight was over. The Vicks were gone. Their ships vanished into the night sky, their forces scattered or destroyed. The Casu had won, but the cost had been severe. Jordan made his way through the aftermath, checking on the wounded, organizing recovery efforts. 14 Casu warriors were dead, their bodies laid out with respect and covered with clan banners. Twice that number were wounded, some seriously. Basiri would live, Cora assured him, though her fighting days might be over, depending on how the burns healed. Jordan found Gabrali in the center of the devastation, helping tend to the injured despite her own exhaustion. Her silver robes were stained with blood, her hair disheveled, her face marked with soot and tears. But she was alive, and her people had survived. She saw him and came to him, walking into his arms without hesitation. They stood together in the flickering light of the fires that still burned across the battlefield. Two warriors who had found something worth fighting for in each other. "We won," she said, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "Against all odds, against superior numbers and weapons, we actually won." "You won," Jordan corrected gently. "Your warriors fought with courage and skill. Your people stood when others would have run. I just showed you how to use what you already had." Gabrali pulled back to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "You did more than that. You gave us hope. You gave us a chance when we had none. You saved my daughter twice, and then you saved all of us." They spent the rest of the night helping with the wounded and the dead, doing the necessary work that came after every battle. Jordan knew this part well, had lived it dozens of times before. The adrenaline faded. The reality set in. The cost became clear. 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and recovery. The Casu buried their dead with honor, singing songs that echoed through the canyons for hours, building cairns that would mark their sacrifice for generations. The wounded healed slowly, tended by Casu healers whose knowledge of medicine was sophisticated despite their lack of modern technology. Scouts confirmed that the Vicks had indeed left the planet entirely, driven off by their unexpected defeat. The remaining settlements to the north reported that the raiders had abandoned their bases and fled to space. The threat was over, at least for now. And around Jordan's cabin on the plateau, a profound change was taking place. Gabrali had decided, with the agreement of her council of elders, that the valley was too vulnerable despite its beauty. The plateau offered better defensive positions, clearer sightlines, multiple escape routes if they were needed again. The Starlight clan began to relocate, building a new settlement adjacent to Jordan's isolated cabin. Structures rose from the rock, carved and shaped with the same skill they had shown in the valley. Gardens were planted in protected areas where soil could be built up and water could be collected. The community began to take shape, a blend of Casu tradition and practical defensive positioning. Jordan found himself at the center of this new community in ways he had never imagined. The Council of Elders held a ceremony, calling together the entire clan to witness. They presented Jordan with a new title, speaking in formal Casu before translating to common for his benefit. Friend of the Heart, they named him, placing a second bracelet on his other wrist, this one even more elaborate than the first. A title that has never been given to an outsider in all our long history. You are one of us now, fully and completely. You may speak in our councils. You may share in our decisions. You have earned a place among us that can never be taken away. Gabrali stood beside him during the ceremony, her hand in his, making her choice clear to everyone watching. The chief of the Starlight clan had taken the human warrior as her partner, had chosen to bind her future to his. The Casu accepted this with grace and celebration, seeing in Jordan the qualities they valued most: courage, loyalty, skill in battle, and compassion for those who needed protection. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Jordan and Gabrali sat on his porch watching the twin moons rise together over the new settlement. Emina came running up to them, her face bright with excitement, her hands cupped carefully around something precious. "Look what I found," she said breathlessly, opening her hands to reveal a tiny crystal. "Growing right there by the side of your house, right where you and Mother sit every night." She held out the crystal for their inspection. It was a heart gem in its earliest stage of growth, barely formed, but already pulsing with that characteristic blue light. No larger than a child's fingernail, but undeniably real, undeniably significant. It is a sign, Amina declared with the certainty of youth. The elders say that heart gems only grow where there is harmony and balance, where the earth itself approves of what is happening. This place, your home that is now our home, it is blessed by the world itself. Jordan looked at Gabrali, seeing his own wonder reflected in her eyes. She was smiling, her resonance warm and content in a way that he had learned to recognize and cherish. Perhaps it is not just my home anymore, he said softly. Perhaps it never was meant to be mine alone. Our home, Gabrali agreed, leaning against him, fitting into the space beside him like she had always belonged there. Our family, our future. She rested her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the stars emerge one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. Emina settled on Jordan's other side, the crystal cupped carefully in her hands. Rolly stretched out at their feet with a contented sigh. The galaxy was still a vast place, Jordan thought, still full of conflict and sorrow and endless small cruelties. But here, in this small corner of one unremarkable world, they had carved out something precious, a place of peace in a universe of war, a family built from the wreckage of loss and the courage to hope again. The settlement below them hummed with life, voices raised in conversation and laughter, children playing their eternal games, warriors sharing stories of the battle that had saved them all. Fires were lit against the darkness, their light pushing back the night in small circles of warmth and safety. Jordan thought about his journey from Earth, through 15 years of war and 7 years of isolation, to this moment on this porch with these people. He had run from connection, had sought escape in loneliness, had convinced himself that he was better off alone. He had been spectacularly wrong. Sometimes the things you run from are exactly what you need to run toward. Sometimes salvation comes from the last place you expect it. Sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you were born into, forged in shared danger and sealed with mutual respect. Gabrali turned her head to look at him, her green eyes catching the light of the rising moons. She murmured something in her own language, words he had learned over the past weeks, words that spoke of belonging and commitment and love that transcended the boundaries of species or origin. Jordan whispered his answer in the same language, his accent still clumsy but his meaning crystal clear. He pulled her closer, feeling the vibration of her contentment resonating through both their bodies. Emina had fallen asleep between them, the tiny crystal still clutched in her hand, her breathing deep and peaceful. The child had found two people who would protect her, who would die before they let harm come to her. She was safe in a way that few children in this dangerous galaxy could claim to be. Rolly's ears twitched at some sound only he could hear, but after a moment he settled back down, deciding whatever it was posed no threat. The dog had accepted their extended family with the same pragmatic grace he brought to everything, adapting to the presence of Kasu children who wanted to pet him and warriors who treated him with respect earned in battle. The twin moons climbed higher in the sky, their light painting the desert in silver and shadow, transforming the harsh landscape into something magical and strange. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities. The settlement would continue to grow. Jordan would train more warriors in the tactics that had saved them. Gabrali would lead her people with wisdom and strength, and Jordan would stand beside her, offering counsel when asked and support always. But tonight was for peace, for gratitude, for holding close the people who mattered most. Tonight was for believing that the future they were building together might actually last, that the hope growing in their hearts might prove more durable than all the weapons and violence of the wider galaxy. Jordan looked up at the stars, at the infinite possibilities scattered across the void, and felt something he had not experienced in years. Not just contentment, though that was part of it. Not just satisfaction, though he felt that too. What he felt was belonging, the deep and unshakable certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, with exactly the people who made his life worthwhile. He had come to this world seeking an ending, an escape from a life that had become unbearable. Instead, he had found a beginning, the start of something new and precious and worth fighting to preserve. The settlement's fires burned throughout the night, beacons of warmth and community in the darkness. The Kasu sang their songs, told their stories, strengthened the bonds that held them together as a people. And on the porch of the cabin that had once sheltered only loneliness and regret, a new family sat together, watching the night and the stars and believing in tomorrow. The heart gem in Emina's hand pulsed gently with its eternal rhythm, a symbol of growth and possibility, a promise from the world itself that this place, this union of human and Kasu, of warrior and chief, of survivor and community, was blessed and approved and meant to flourish. And the stars watched over them all, silent witnesses to the small miracles that happen every day in the vast indifference of space, the moments of connection and courage that make the universe a little less cold and a little more human, regardless of what form that humanity takes.